يرسل واحد.
I don't know, Josh. Upside down.
Doesn't like you guys. Seen you guys enough. I feel like this is like detoxing for him.
Let me put an emoji or something.
Oh, there you go. Oh, what happened?
How do we put one?
But there's nothing. Press add.
Michael, have we started yet?
The Spidey.
Michael disappeared.
You're doing Eddie? No, not those. I feel like. Oops.
Your computer doesn't have the required.
Wait, one second.
Dave, did you want to take it away for us?
All right, guys, I'll
No,
start
no.
off.
Sorry.
So, I am going to be talking about crisis and how we respond to crises in our life. So there are many types of crises. Sometimes they're painful, sometimes they're costly, sometimes they're surprising, they come out of the blue. The idea is if we respond in the right way, we can profit out of those tribulations that come to us. But if we respond the wrong way, we may find ourselves paying a huge price. Now, many of us have faced a difficult time in our life. Everybody has. At some point, everybody will go through a difficult time, and especially now more than ever. So how do we respond to it? We could get angry and get bitter and start becoming hostile to other people. We can start blaming God and blaming other people for the bad things that are happening to us. And we can start questioning God, why are you doing this? And we can say things like God is angry with us, or God is punishing us, or it's because of this person or that person. But is there a better way to deal with these crises? And today's short message is an encouraging one. Yes, there is a proper way to respond. In fact, in every tribulation, there's an opportunity to profit. And we often miss those opportunities that God has put in our lives. A perfect example of how to respond to tribulations is the story of Joseph. In Genesis 37, Joseph was loved by his father and was extremely hated by his brother. So we read in Genesis 37, verse 18 to 22. Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him to his father. Genesis 37, 18 to 22. Now we know the rest of the story. Joseph's brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt with them to be sold as a slave to the Egyptians. Now at that point, Joseph could have abandoned God, and him being a young man that's well off and was once loved by his wealthy father, and now he's sold off to the highest bidder to be a slave for the rest of his life. What he didn't know was that God sent him this tribulation to save his life and his brothers who wanted to do harm for him. Now, did Joseph complain, get angry, or blame God? So in Genesis 39, 2 to 6, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and then the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put under his authority. say it was from that time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, and the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Now, a little later, Joseph gets thrown in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Joseph was an honest man, and even though he was following the commandments and was good in the sight of the Lord, he still faced tribulations. Now, did God forsake Joseph? Or did God have a bigger plan for Joseph and the Egyptians? Now, Joseph, the dreamer, was known for his dreams. In prison, he would interpret the dreams of the other prisoners, and one time he interpreted the dreams of one of the people that were working for Pharaoh, and he was thrown in jail, and he interpreted his dream, and his dream was that he was going to be released from the jail, and he was going to go back to working for Pharaoh. One day, many years after that, that man was working for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh had a dream, and those dreams that Pharaoh was having were really troubling. Pharaoh brought all the magicians and the wise men to try and interpret the dreams. And one of the servants of Pharaoh was in prison with Joseph, and he remembered many years ago that Joseph interpreted his dream. And essentially, after that, Joseph was called by Pharaoh, and Joseph interpreted his dream. We know the story. A great famine was coming to Egypt and all the surrounding lands. And many people were going to starve and die. Pharaoh had a massive problem on his hands, and essentially Joseph was the solution. If Joseph was not there, these people were going to die. Now, who was going to lead the effort and essentially save all those people's lives? Pharaoh had Joseph on his hands, and essentially Joseph was the solution. Now, Joseph was suddenly the second in charge of all of Egypt, leading the biggest humanitarian effort in history. And one day his brothers and his father are bowing before him because they were starving and needed food to eat, just like was in the dream. Now, suddenly it was clear. Joseph, who could never understand why God was allowing these tribulations to happen to him, even though he was trying to be a good man, he certainly could have said that the world is bad, and he could have said that, God has forsaken me, and God is punishing me, and why is God punishing us? He could have said all those things. And when in fact Joseph was hated by his brothers, and was almost killed, and was sold as a slave, was misjudged, thrown in jail, forsaken to fulfill God's plan to save him, and to save the lives of many other people, and to bring peace to Egypt and his people. Now, I just want you to imagine if Joseph was to not listen to his father and didn't go and check on his brothers, or fall into temptation with Potiphar's wife and not get thrown in prison, or not believe in God's promises that he will one day be more glorified than his brothers. He and his brothers would have eventually died of starvation, and a lot of people would have died with him. Now, Joseph obviously couldn't have predicted that that all these things would have happened. And, you could only see God's plan in retrospect. So Joseph, looking back at his life, we know that God had a plan for him. But Joseph, in that current situation, when he was in jail, or when Joseph was sold off, he couldn't have predicted that. He couldn't have known what was going on and why it was happening. He just thought things were probably unfair. But he's still stuck. He's still stuck to God's promises. Joseph's attitude is the perfect example of profiting from the tribulations that we face and having faith in God's plans. I just want to close with Psalms 27:14, which was written early in David's life, during the time when he was escaping from King Saul, during the time of tribulation. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage. He shall strengthen you. He shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. That's all I have. Thank you.
Stevie.
right, thanks for that, DB. Should we go straight to the talk? Yeah.
Maybe go for it.
All right. Cool.
Wait. Any questions first? Does anyone want to ask any questions? Were you all listening to DB? No questions? Well, you're all on mute. I can see that. Let's go to the talk, Yemi. Hopefully there'll be questions at the end of the talk. Take notes.
Hello, good evening, youth of St. Cosmin and Damian Church, Kellyville. We're doing a virtual youth meeting today because of the pandemic that's going on. I wish I could have been with you all the way in Kellyville. I was really looking forward to driving a whole hour and coming there with you guys. I just want to introduce myself before I begin, so I'm not just a random person talking at you. My name's Peter Mikhail. I was born in Sydney. I lived in Queensland for 12 years where I studied medicine and I became a GP, and I'm back in Sydney. My brother you might know, Matthew Mikhail. He's really good friends with your IT overlord, Michael Farah, and we travelled with Michael Farah overseas a couple of years ago, so that's my connection to your youth group. Thanks to Elizabeth Gerges for roping me into this, and for Timmy for organising the talk with me today. The fear and failure is the topic of the series. Today we're going to focus more on fear, and I think it's obviously very relevant given what's happened in the world today. The whole pandemic thing has caused a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety amongst people, so it's a good time to talk about it. Before we start, we'll start in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. I just want to throw a verse out there that we're going to come back to later. It won't mean much now, but you'll just see at one point the verse will become relevant. So the verse is from Psalm 125. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. So we're going to come back to that verse. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. So, so the world's been turned upside down by this coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of people have a lot of fears about different things. Some of those fears are justified, some are not. There's a lot of panic that's been going on these days, panic buying, panic shopping, paranoid behavior, a lot of anxiety, and even some suicides, unfortunately, in the news due to all of the emotional distress caused by the pandemic and everything that's been happening. So I think it's a very good time to talk about this topic. I'm not sure if it was chosen specifically about what's happening in the world now, but it's a very good time and a very relevant time to talk about fear. So we're going to address four main things. What exactly is fear? Is fear healthy or unhealthy? And as Christians, how do we understand fear? And then the fourth thing is, how do we stay healthy with all of this fear around us and possibly the fears already inside us? So we'll try to answer those questions. So let's start with, I always think it's funny when you look up the Oxford Dictionary definition of things. So I looked up the word fear in the Oxford Dictionary today. And the definition of fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. So an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that something or someone is going to cause pain or is a threat to you. Okay, so is there anything wrong with that, what I just said, to have a negative emotion when you perceive that someone or something is dangerous and likely to cause you harm? Isn't that a good thing, that you avoid harmful things and that you are protected from these things? You could even argue that's inbuilt in us and it's part of our own physiology to be afraid of dangerous things. So the answer to that is yes, it is. It's an innate part of our instincts, and it's been helping us. These instincts have been helping us survive for millennia. So there's a helpful side to this. So we're going to explore both sides. So the question is then, who created this physiology and who created this instinct? Of course, it's God. God created us with our physiology, with our instincts, and so this is a So one part of it is a God-given, inbuilt, healthy function that we have. So God made us perfect and in His image. So there's nothing innately wrong with human nature. So what could possibly be wrong with this? So, you know, I think it's healthy and normal to experience a negative emotion when there's something you consider to be threatening. Of course, it's healthy. It's how we were built by God. For example, if an extreme example would be if you're standing in front of a pit of snakes, and you know that they're going to be poisonous, and you know if you walk in they're aggressive and they're going to bite you. Is it healthy at that moment to have a negative emotion, to be fearful, to be cautious? Of course, the answer is yes. That's an extreme example to demonstrate that there is a healthy type of fear. You might want to call it a healthy concern, for example. So that's an extreme example, but it just demonstrates the point that there's a healthy way that there's a healthy approach, or a healthy side of fear, I should say. Same thing that with what's happening these days with this pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. I think it's pretty healthy, mentally healthy, and of course physically healthy, to take the precautions that the health experts have put in place for us. They're there for a reason, and I don't think there's anything particularly unhealthy in saying, yes, there's a health threat going on, and I'm going to take the precautions. So on its own, it's not wrong to be concerned about something that deserves concern and to take steps. I'm going to take it even a step further and say that even Jesus Christ Himself felt this type of fear, and fear in inverted commas, because it was the healthy type of fear, we believe, in the Garden of Gethsemane when He prayed the following prayer. He said, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." From Matthew 26:39. He said, "Oh, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me." And they say that He sweated blood, which is an extreme physical reaction to emotional distress. So Jesus Christ Himself had extreme emotional distress with regards to a threat that was coming up. He was about to be trialed and crucified. He was about to be murdered, and He knew that, and He perceived that threat, just like the dictionary definition of fear. He perceived the threat, and there was a negative emotion. So Christ Himself had a type of fear, but Christ, being perfect as an example of what to do and what to we consider acceptable, gives us an example of this healthy side of the fear. There was an actual threat to his life, as we know, and he had a negative emotion, and he tried to escape it through that prayer, but at the end of the day, he said, "Not as I will, as you will." So that overall, that proves that there's a healthy, normal type of fear, and maybe we need to call it something else, because fear can be taken both ways. So we might want to call it justified concern or something like that. So if you have a concern that's justified, and that concern results in a negative emotion, I think that's the healthy side of fear, and that should be discerned, and that should be we should know whether, when we're concerned, whether this is justified fear or whether it's going to be the negative type, which is what we're going to talk about now. So that's the healthy side. What's the unhealthy end of the spectrum? When is fear unhealthy, and when is fear unhelpful? Clearly, any negative emotion that's not based on reality, but based on false information or false expectation, that's never going to be healthy. So when it's not based on fact, when it's based on our thoughts, when it's based on rumor, when it's based on expectations, and that's kind of anxiety, and when that fear is so that's one aspect, is when it's not based on reality, and then also when the fear is so excessive that it disables you in some way. So that could be called, instead of the positive or the healthy side of fear being called justified concern, for lack of a better word, we'll call this unhealthy side excessive worry, or even anxiety or phobia. That's the unhealthy aspect of fear that we should discern from the healthy type of fear. So this is the type of fear that would lead someone to develop anxiety, be depressed, or to act in an irrational way, like what you're seeing in the shops at the moment, and what you might be seeing and hearing around the world and in Australia. So can make you do things that you wouldn't normally do because of this fear. So we touched briefly on fear and anxiety not being based on reality. So that's the first little tip that I'll give you to combat this, is to try to base your concern and question any fear against reality and against facts. You know, whether it be relating to our personal lives, are we worrying, for example, about a situation, a relationship, or something that's our expectation, or what we think about something, or is it actually based on reality? If it's based on reality, then I think you can take the next step and see whether it's justified. So at the moment, like, this is probably more relevant to your parents, but there's a lot of misinformation that's out there on the coronavirus, on WhatsApp and Facebook, and there's a lot of trolls and just like fake bits of information that are out there. So let's try to avoid that by using our God-given intellect to discern reliable sources of information when it comes to like the pandemic that's happening now. And also in our personal lives, we should discern fact from fiction just by questioning things. Another question is, how does the mind or the brain assign a level of threat? So how do we decide if something's threatening? I mean, there are basic things like something's physically threatening to us, that's obvious. Something might make us physically unsafe or socially unsafe or isolate us, make us lonely. These are, you know, basic instincts. Other times it's not as obvious. So for example, even talking about those potentially obvious things like your physical health, even falling sick, obviously it's not welcomed by most people, but there are some people who actually welcome illness. There are countless stories in the Bibles and the stories of the fathers where people, and typically people of a high spiritual level, so again, this may not be perfectly relevant to us, but it proves a point. Some people embrace the blessing of carrying an illness, for example, and other people look at it as something that's going to be the end of their life. And so that's an example of two different reactions to the same thing. Same diagnosis, for example. Someone says, what a blessing for me to carry this, and the other person says, it's all over, and they lose hope and they're just scared of the end result. So what I'm trying to point to here in the difference between those approaches is the values. What is important to you? What do you value the most? Because whatever we value, we protect, and whenever something we value is threatened, that's when you're likely to develop a negative emotion, and that comes back to the definition of fear. So you're only something that you value being threatened should be important. And so this links into the spiritual application of things as opposed to the more psychology-based thinking. It's demonstrated in the Gospel of Matthew 13:44. The verse that says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." So a man who the kingdom of heaven is likened to that treasure, he found it and he valued it like treasure, and he sold everything because he valued that thing so much. That goes back to anything. If anything to us is treasure, we'll sell what we have to buy that field. So the kingdom of heaven is that treasure, or at least it should be. So if we value the kingdom of heaven like treasure, we're going to sacrifice and sell everything that we have and buy the piece of land where that treasure is. I'm not saying here that this trumps everything else and, you know, nothing else matters. I'm not saying this should come at the expense of all of our earthly or bodily needs. No, we have earthly needs and bodily needs, and God knows that, and God cares about that, and that's another topic, but God cares about our earthly needs. But seeking the kingdom of heaven first is the type of value that would lead to a healthy perspective on other aspects of our life. And so if that is on the top of our mountain of values, then everything else will be healthier, as opposed to having the kingdom of heaven or our spiritual life buried with underneath our popularity or our income or our job or our appearance or other things that we know are not more important than our salvation, but sometimes we act like they are, and it reveals our true self. So that's something everyone can, suppose, reflect on. What are our actions, or what fields are we buying? What treasure is in the field that we're selling our time and resources to go and buy? Okay, so I mean, like that can be a whole other talk if about how do you make the kingdom of heaven your very first priority. And we're not going to discuss exactly how to go about instilling that value in ourselves, but I'll leave that one for you to think about. This also leads to the second sort of spiritual contemplation, being trust. And so trust, this is where the verse at the beginning links back. The verse was from Psalm 125, and it kind of links this final part of what I'm going to talk about. Psalm 125, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. So those who trust in the Lord are like a mountain, and they cannot be moved. Not be moved by anything, not by rain, not by wind, not by a flood, not by a huge mass hitting it. So I'm going to talk briefly about this, although it's a big topic. In order to make yourself unshakable, like a mountain, like is referenced in Psalm 125, if you want to be unshakable, meaning you're not shaken, you don't have this negative fear, then the key is to trust in the Lord. And this whole trust process is a whole topic on its own. I'm not going to go into that today, but I just want to introduce to you that idea of trusting in the Lord and how to build that trust for the Lord. So I'm going to refer you to another series of talks. The current series actually from Father Anthony Messiah from Washington, D.C. I think you find him on fatheranthony.com. His current series is called Unshakable, and it actually inspired the theme verse today and some of the things that I'm talking about. And so he talks in his series, that's actually he's halfway through his series, about how to be unshakable and how to increase our trust in God. So please go and check out that talk. I think it's a good way to fill all of your quarantine time these days. Okay. So it's just to summarize what I've spoken about. Fear on its own is defined as a negative emotion towards a perceived threat, just as a broad definition. And then there's two sides of that. There's a healthy and helpful type of fear that is helpful for our survival and helps us achieve the things that we want to achieve. For example, it's right to be fearful about something that might consume your time to the point where you won't be able to pray or go to church or attend services or be a good son, friend, worker. So it's right to be concerned and fearful about some things that will threaten important things in your life. There's the other side of the spectrum is the unhealthy type of fear that is usually not based on reality or is excessive and debilitating, and it's usually something that holds you back from functioning properly. And then the way to address the unhealthy fear, like we spoke about, is number one, make sure your fear is based on fact rather than fiction, so get some information about things. Secondly, it would be to examine your personal values, and as much as possible, work daily to align those values with God's values, to try to bring the kingdom of heaven to the top of the heap, because then other values will become healthier once you have that at the top. And then the third thing is working on our trust in God, which I didn't talk about in detail, but I'm going to refer you to Father Anthony's series. Okay, thanks for putting up with me. That's all I've got to say for now. Thanks again for inviting me, and I hope I can come up to Kellyville and see you guys one day. That's it. Glory be to God. Forever amen.
You can go here.
I think I saw Naomi had a question.
Naomi put, I put Naomi's hand up. I was just trying to see if I can see it.
I actually have a question. Who am I asking the?
You're asking me.
Fortunately,
Oh.
Pete's
Oh,
not
okay,
with us.
never mind. I don't want to ask the question anymore. No.
طيب حاضر.
So we sort of like in the talk we learnt about I guess good and bad fear, and my question's about bad fear. We spoke also about ways of dealing with bad fear, but then there was also, I guess, I feel like there's a step before we get to that self-awareness, knowing that I guess we're scared of something, and then there's sort of like I feel like when I'm scared or when I'm worried, I'm not thinking rationally. And I'm not thinking how can I process this information in step A, step B, step C. I feel like I'm sort of cluttered. How can I become firstly more grounded and secondly more self-aware of myself before so I can go through that methodology of getting to the whole reflecting on it. Is it rational and like all these things that come after that. So I feel like there's a step before we get there. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just
And that step is what Peter said. Go and listen to Abuna Anthony Messiha's series.
Okay.
Developing that trust in God.
Okay.
It's being able to develop that trust. Now, one of the things which we said last week from the book of James, the first epistle of St. James, or the epistle of St. James, first chapter. St. James, the way he describes it is he says that what we need to do is we need to have, make this tribulation or this trouble needs to be the apex of our joy. It is the most joy that I could have. And in having that joy, I then need to understand that God only does or only allows what is good for me. And for this, I need to pray for wisdom, because it's that wisdom that will allow me to understand his will and to see that there is nothing to fear because I'm in his hands. So that relationship of trust is what Peter said he's not going to delve into, and he referred all of you to listen to Abuna Anthony Messiha. It's developing that relationship of trust with God. And the way we relation, like one of the things I always say to people that, especially during confession, when something significant happens in their life, I say to them, this is God visiting your life and saying, I was here. You know, I remember when we were young, we used to go to places and try and etch on the stone, you know, JT 28th of March 2020. You know how people do that. God sometimes comes into our life and he says, Jesus Christ was here because something significant happens. These are important memories for us to itch, because it's these experiences where we have this obvious interference of God in our lives that strengthen our trust in him. And it is these experiences that I need to draw on when I'm facing a tribulation. Yes? That's why I always say to people, go and have this diary that is called God Was Here. There'll be so many experiences, so many circumstances in your life where this has happened. But unfortunately, we humans forget very quickly. This is why we need to have this diary, remembering when God was here. That will help me develop that relationship with trust. I will learn to trust him. The next time I have a tribulation in my life, I look in my diary and I go, well, this happened to me 5 and 6 years ago, and out of the blue or miraculously the problem was solved. This was God's interference. I'm going to hold still. I know I'm in the hands of God. The fact that there's a tribulation means God loves me, means God wants me to learn from it, means God wants me to be improved by it, and therefore I'll find the fear would disappear.
Okay.
But then, of course, like I said, St. James has that whole pray with faith so that you may receive wisdom.
Mhm.
Yeah. I hope that answers the question, but definitely we either go listen to Abuna Anthony Messiha about trusting God, or I can't see. Okay, I saw no, can't see Tim or Amanda here, but definitely something that we can add as a topic for the future.
Okay, thank you, Abuna.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All I can say, I miss you all.
Miss you too, Abuna.
Inshallah, we're going to pray a
Miss you,
liturgy this
Abuna.
Sunday. I miss you all. We're going to pray a liturgy this Sunday that will be streamed. It'll just be Abuna and the two deacons. So we'll hopefully stream that so you all can join us. I will send a message shortly. It's going to be from 8 till 10, but I hope you can join us. Two deacons, that's all that's allowed. Two deacons.
Who's
Um,
the deacons, Abuna?
Wasn't it one?
It was one, and
I'm gonna be
we
a deacon,
asked.
Abuna. Can
Let me
females
check
be deacon
a
now?
second. Huh?
Can females be deacons now so we can come to the mass?
Mary, how are you, Mary?
Good, how are you?
I love you, Mary. My heart goes to you, Eddie.
What?
ربنا معاكم. May the Lord bless your lives. I think Michael can stop the stream if it hasn't been stopped yet. And
Yeah,
then
I'll
I
stop
think,
it now.
yeah, I think you guys wanted to
Okay.
chill out, is what I saw in the post. So maybe you can catch up on